I'm not sharing any magic or any secrets. These are just my journal entries and diary entries from my career. A little bit, about me as I as I proceed further. I've had a long career. I actually started as an engineer writing compilers and simulators in an EDA company called Synopsys, which is the largest organization in that space. As a very curious engineer, I went on to do an MBA because I was always questioning the why behind why am I going and sitting and debugging the next chip design in an ST Microelectronics or in a Texas Instruments in an Intel, and what are these companies doing with the work that I'm doing as an engineer. So that led me to an MBA, which positioned me in my first product role in Adobe. And that was back in 2010. So here's an engineer with an MPhil in AI, a master's, and a background in computer science, now working as a product manager. And as luck would have it, that was also the time when touch devices were coming in and Adobe was facing a big disruption. Instagram had just been bought over by Facebook for about $1 billion, and everybody, particularly the business heads in the Photoshop team, were wondering, and there was a chill running down their spine. What if the entire age of picture editing or image editing shifts to apps? The desktop products that Adobe had and were cash cows would completely go down the drain. And as luck would have it, as luck would have it, I was part of the team that envisioned Creative Cloud, and some of you who are users of Creative Cloud, the little app that sits on your desktop or on your mobile is really my baby. From Adobe, I moved to Autodesk, from creative design to engineering design, and from engineering design to the sprawling startup of called Grab in Southeast Asia, where we were driven by by the mission of changing Southeast Asia and moving it forward. It was a great experience, which is where I learned many of my startup skills, and then now at SPH. A bit of SPH. It's for those who are not from Singapore. Singapore Press Holdings is the largest media conglomerate in Southeast Asia. We have 8 daily newspapers with the flagship names of the Straits Times and the Business Times, which are English dailies. And all of these newspapers span and are published in 4 different languages. Being the largest media player, SPH also runs 5 radio stations, and we have more than 50 plus digital sites and apps. There are 10 magazines, including Her World and Men's Health, and we deal with the traffic of almost about 50 million monthly unique users and about 225 million monthly page views. Having said that, the organization did not have a product practice. And so about 3 years ago, we founded the product practice and I started setting it up in an organization where typically product decisions were made by newsrooms and editors. So while many of you would find yourself in a product organization where the processes are set up, or at least everybody's fairly conversant with what product managers and designers do and how does it tie it back to your own business, here I was in a situation where we were setting up that stage. And so what I'm going to tell you next are a series of examples, um, a story, um, a story that would eventually lead you to, that hopefully would lead you to believe that if you stay true to yourself as product managers and designers, the techniques and the methodologies don't change. Cheryl, in the earlier presentation, shared about the runway that startups don't have because of the sheer exigency of shipping something out fast. She also rightly mentioned about the wall of mountains and how slow decision making mars a large corporate or a large organization from moving faster. But the key to to navigating all this is that you as product managers and designers must retain your DNA, and the rest of the talk is going to talk about that. Um, so any journey, whether it's a new product journey or a transformation journey, or the next travel experience that you're going to take in your personal life, must start with acceptance and some form of recalibration. You must ask yourself, where are we and where do we want to get to? In the case of SPH, we had to accept that we are transforming. Media business is big time disrupted. Our print newspaper revenues are falling. Most of the folks are reading and consuming their news and media from Google or Facebook or from other social media. So we have to first accept that we are no longer a monopoly. And in that process, focus the entire team and the organization towards end outcomes and the mission. In that process, you will have to empower employees, engage customers, transform your products, optimize your operations. But at the same time, you have to be very strategic, very intentional and systematic about it. What we observe typically in monopolies is that a culture of complacence sets in, a sense of comfort sets in, that that mindset has to be gotten out of. So that's where we are. Particularly for me, I think it's not only acceptance of where you are and where you need to be, but at the same time, recalibration and a promise to yourself. Recalibration of your speed. I came into SPH from a rocket ship of Grab. We had just completed Uber's acquisition in Southeast Asia. And here I was in a team which was learning to ship products like product designers and product managers would do, like any modern technology company would do. We were a media company. So there needs to be recalibration, because in such an environment, it is very easy for bad habits to slide by. And so there is this concept of, I strongly believe in atomic habits and being 1% better. How do you drill that into an organization? How do you make people respond that way? Is a recalibration on your part. So where do we begin? The first and the best place to begin with is on the ground. Do your rows, thorns, buds exercises. What you learn on the floor, and I was at a leadership position. So what you learn on the floor from people, from engineers on the ground, from designers on the ground, from editors on the ground, from journalists on the ground, is just invaluable. And that is where you will get the first principles of what you can do next to make things better. So, translating your retrospective fundamentals and frameworks, a sprint retrospective framework into a format where you're trying to figure out the lay of the land is the first step that you must begin with. And I can guarantee you that you'll get pointers for how to make progress further. That's because with acceptance and listening comes the openness of mind and senses to really call out what's holding us back. And that is really the key. If you cannot identify and call out what's holding you back, you will never be able to act on it. The second part of that journey is change the narrative, make the entire organization outcome focused, audience centric, and build a problem solving mindset in them. And I mean, if you can apply this to a team culture or to an organization wide culture, or even to your small scrum team or to a small product team. The principles remain the same, whether you're in a startup or in a large organization. And this is really key, because once you focus the entire team on a common business metric, on a common goal that you want to achieve, everybody starts moving in that direction. It's easier said than done, but that's where we have to begin. And the next, being the beholders of product and design, you have to stick to the tenets of building strong products. In an organization like a media company that I work in right now and lead the product and design teams, you have to focus the entire team in building the right products. Make them make them focus on who's the customer, make them focus on why they are doing, why you're doing what you are doing. Be extremely data driven and make sure that you have metrics. And as has been said, fail early, test and learn, and iterate. At this point, I can't emphasize enough the need to build the right products that customers love. Focus on the who your customers are, what their needs are, what their context and possibilities are, and do not forget the limitations of their environment or the technology that they may be using for their business to succeed. Why is really important, because unless you know why it makes sense for your user to solve that problem, why that outcome is important, you're not going to be able to maximize the chances of your success. And finally, know your North Star metrics, know your business model. Unless you are able to connect what your customers want with what your business needs, you will not be able to build or let alone ship something that is useful, that is going to be useful for them. And if you don't have metrics, please start there. Start in your team, and if and then mobilize that through examples to your entire organization, working with your leadership teams. Typically, you see products are created using one of these conversation starters, like our competitor just launched something. How can we just copy it or launch or respond quickly with something similar? Or we have a really cool idea, let's just go roll it out without doing any validation on whether it will work. You can do that validation through low fidelity prototypes or fake door experiments or contextual inquiries, but you must have some basis for moving forward. And the worst of all is we have built this technology. Let's just retrofit it into one of the use cases, find that use case for it. We are halfway into today's presentation cycle, and much of this might seem similar to what others have spoken about, but that is the key. As product managers and designers, you have to be like a broken record. And when you have to be a broken record, you must champion that cause with empathy and humility. And the reason for that is very simple. You as product and design people are at the heart of strategy, finance, technology development, operations, customer support, sales, marketing, legal. You're wearers of many hats. You're beholders of many a stakeholder context. And that requires you to be master communicators that can tailor your message for each of the stakeholders. I think in the previous talk, in the previous panel, one of the speakers spoke about the importance of being storytellers. That's absolutely necessary. You have to be able to tell that story, and you have to be able to tailor it to the audience you're speaking to. So how did we do it at SPH? The first thing we realized is that we accepted that Singapore is diverse. We figured out and accepted that it's a multiracial, multilingual, multicultural society with 4 official languages, many dialects. We told ourselves that we are hyperlocal. The needs of the Malay community is very different from the needs of a Tamil community, is very different from the needs of an English-speaking community. And so by no means, if we were to build successful products, we had to be hyperlocal, and we had to be out there listening to our readers. In fact, because we are a media company, we are in a two-sided network effect. One, of having consumers coming to our media houses and consuming our information through subscriptions, and also through brands that advertise with us and generate one of the strongest pillars of our revenue, of our top line. So therefore, knowledge of your business model is really key towards defining your product vision and the features that you're going to build in it. A subscription business requires us to empathize with our users, deliver continuously, and act fast, which means we have to focus on the acquisition cycle, on the retention cycle, building loyalty, and at the same time, keeping an eye on managing churn, one of our North Star metrics. And this is something that was common at the approaches we had taken, not only in large companies like Adobe and Autodesk, but also in a small company like Grab. And I'll talk through a few examples of how we did it. And but is there really a method to it to build loyalty? Well, there is. You all know about user journeys, customer journeys. You all know about growth loops. The key is to think end-to-end value chains and map your features and products for each of the stages of that value chain or that growth loop. And don't forget, identify key metrics there. So with that in mind, we launched one of our first few products. We realized that the only people who were buying newspapers these days, because our revenues were falling, were older generation. And we knew that we had to migrate this older generation to digital platforms so that we can continue to be in the game as a business for the long term. So how do we do that? We realized from our research that the reason they are sticking with newspaper reading is because they relish the newspaper reading experience. Early morning, the experience of newspaper delivered on your doorstep and you sipping it, reading it while sipping a cup of tea, they really relished it. Also, the form factor of a newspaper made it very convenient for them to glance through news that mattered to them, which was not so easy to do in a small form factor of a phone. So we launched a new product as an experiment, which was called News Tablet, that gave them exactly that. And now News Tablet over the last 1.5 years of its existence has become one of our blockbuster products. Our radio stations, we don't want to be dependent upon the quality of your music system. And with the advent of audio devices such as your Google Home or Amazon Alexa, we also jumped on that bandwagon and tried to reduce friction by making news accessible in audio formats. So today you can listen to our radio stations by just saying, "Hey Google, what's the latest news?" or "Hey Google, can you play me 89.3 Money FM or Kiss 92, which are our flagship products." We realized that by being a media company, by being a powerhouse of a journalistic house with history going back to 175 years, the oldest newspaper that was printed through us, we were sitting on a gold mine of archives of photos whose copyrights we own. And when we went around doing research with creative agency and advertising agencies, they usually had to rely on Getty images or stock photos where the faces in the pictures that they would get would not be Southeast Asian faces. These photos would be of faces in Europe or in the US. So how do you contextualize your advertising message to a local Southeast Asian audience? We felt that there is a gap in that market, and we started with a small experiment of converting our picture archive into a marketplace where you can buy copyrighted photos that are journalists who are award-winning journalists for their photojournalism, not only buy those photos and licenses, but also contribute. So it became like a nice big community where people were buying and also contributing, and on a revenue share basis, earning money. We then expanded that platform to host photography competitions, which became a huge bestseller. We were able to run campaigns with National Museum, with other advertisers, or with new products or new large companies that wanted to make a marketing campaign, rebranding campaign through engagement with their users and with their customers. We insisted, because we are a subscription business, in driving loyalty by making habit forming loops. So for the first time in SPH, we started a rewards points program. And how do we contextualize that rewards points program to our publications? Is you earn rewards by reading more and more articles. If you have read 3 articles and you've gone through a completion meter of 3 articles, we give you some non-monetary rewards of coins, which then you can redeem through one of our supporters or subsidiary businesses. I don't know whether I mentioned, but SPH as a conglomerate also has a large number of malls in Southeast Asia, particularly in Singapore. So many of our merchants and vendors who are part of our malls we got vouchers for them from them and kept the loop of business within our community, within our ecosystem, and that worked really well. We were able to increase engagement by almost 60% through our rewards program, and now it is becoming a mainstay. Habit forming loops. If you watch a video, you can unlock a premium article. The concept here, many of you may be familiar with the concept of a paywall. Let's say you go to a Wall Street Journal or a New York Times or Economist or Harvard Business Review. After having sampled a few articles, say 5 articles, you are posed a call to action of paying. That's called a paywall. So we thought that, hey, if we are losing our anonymous users because they don't want to pay, let's give them a flavor of our premium content, unlock the paywall for them if they watch an advertiser video. So it was a win-win network effect of serving our subscribers, trying to drive them to conversion by giving them a flavor of premium content, and also by at the same time serving the context of an ad of our advertiser by giving them eyeballs to their advertising campaign. Um, Keeping track and making sure that your purchase checkout experience is extremely smooth, reduce as much friction from the point when a potential subscriber has made the intent to pay you, and getting him to really check out your product and pay for it through his credit card. We smoothened that entire process. It used to be 23 clicks earlier, but now it's a 3-step process and you're out with our products. And using these principles, we innovated in many different spheres. So on the left here, you would see a Think China publication. Our Chinese publications are very well respected, not only in Southeast Asia, but also in China. And so there we realized that there's a need in the in the English speaking population to hear that context. So we created a new product, which was English journalism through our Chinese speaking journalists. For our Tamil community, we started job portals and video widgets and movie widgets. For our Malay speaking, for making our Malay newsroom context more accessible to everyone in the world, we built translation tools. So you could simply select a piece of text on our Malay publication and it will translate it to English. Very simple translation services, but great impact in not only bridging communities, but also generating stickiness. And in that process, we were in the last 3 years have been able to literally transform all our products. Now we have headline virality predictors, we have content recommendation engines, we are able to serve personalized content on our products through propensity models and ML engines that we've created in the background. And that is a good segue for me to bring you into being data driven. So when I was at Grab, we were using machine learning models to not only predict demand and supply on how to best serve our users, generate heat maps for our drivers to know where the demand exists, and making sure that when our passenger wants to book a Grab car or a Grab taxi, we are able to allocate a driver to them really fairly quickly. So we did that not only to make it effective, but also to spot trends. So the picture that you see is a cluster of 5-minute bookings in the morning rush hour of office time. Through this heat map, we were able to detect where the morning rush hour demand is and where the morning rush hour supply of our drivers is. And so we started building in product nudges for our drivers to go where the demand exists, and for our passengers, making sure that the surge doesn't kick in simply because there aren't enough drivers there isn't enough supply there. So and thereby meeting the demands of both the drivers and the passengers well. We are doing exactly that in a large company environment. So during COVID-19 crisis, lockdowns, you're all familiar with the lockdowns that hit each one of us. It hit us really bad because newspaper delivery happens manually. There is a newspaper vendor that picks up newspapers from where they are printed and then delivers each newspaper or a collection of newspapers at every individual doorstep. So how do we make sure that despite these lockdowns, when people are at home, at least they are getting their news, at least they are able to read the newspapers? We generated these heat maps through our customer support center for not only predicting delays and then letting our customers know that, hey, your newspaper today will be 1 hour late, and ensuring that customer delight and our commitment to customer service as well as SLAs is met. And at the same time reducing customer call volumes, because if you don't get your newspaper on time and it is 3 hours late, then our support center would be overloaded by calls. We did a similar thing on the advertising side. In order to prove that advertisers should advertise with us, we wanted to give them how do you measure ROI. So we put up cameras on the billboards that brands buy from us, and we used object recognition to tell them, hey, this is the exposure that your ads are getting through us. Of course, not everybody in these cars and trucks are looking at the billboard, but the chances of being able to quantify that and then add statistical probability to it in order to arrive at an ROI gave them a lot more comfort than just, hey, you should just advertise with us and we'll put you up on a really busy junction. This junction is is called the Little India Junction in Singapore, for those who are familiar with this geography, and is a really busy junction. All of our products, like I said, are now powered by machine learning algorithms. When a reader hits an article on our publications, we listen to about 50 signals and generate a propensity score, which we optimize based on several iterations of dynamic paywall A/B tests, and eventually not only giving them targeted content recommendation, but also a targeted subscription call to action. And we've seen that in the last 2 years or so, the click-through rate to subscribe has increased 4 times. And lastly, in the tenets of building strong products, I can't reiterate more than anyone else has said earlier, that if you're not failing, you're not learning. And it's the same. Now I'm going to draw, it's the same story, whether I was at Grab or at SPH. Many of you are probably familiar with this Grab booking experience in the beginning. This was very similar to an Uber booking experience, where if you notice, there are 3 points of decisions that we were asking our passengers to make. Should I select the pickup point first? Should I select the drop-off point first? Or should I select the service that you want me to use, whether it's a taxi or a car or a premium car? And how did we come to realize that we have to optimize the screen? We realized that a lot of people are opening our app, but they were not clicking on the book button. So having a metric like a book through rate made us realize that, hey, there must be something wrong. And so we transformed our design from what is on the left to what is on the right. Pre-select the current location, pre-select, change all the verticals into a card format, and remember the card, remember the service that you used last time, and leave the user to only making one decision. Where are you going to? And then get them to click the book button. What that gave us? 30% increase in our conversions. And for a company like Grab, which at that time was doing like 1 million rides a day, that 30% conversion meant a huge boost to not only our promise as a startup, but also as an example of our agility and iterative way of approaching products. Another story, when you encounter this every day, either when you're trying to book an Uber ride or a Grab ride or whichever ride hailing firm you use. If you're in China, Didi, for instance, either you waited too long or the allocation didn't happen, or the driver asked you to cancel. We realized that 50% of cancels were happening within 2 minutes of the cab getting allocated. So we launched Grab Chat, which we were very proud that was the first Grab was the first company to have launched this capability of chatting with your driver, and was adopted by other ride-hailing firms in the world. Um, this chart on the top shows you the impact that we got, which is cancellations reduced big time when drivers were able to chat with passengers. We applied the same principles in SPH. One of our best methods of personalizing reader experience is to send you email newsletters. So we experimented with the time we send newsletters, the format we send newsletters in, the subject lines we create to sending those newsletters, the emojis you can use in the subject line to get attention, and with that in that process, within a span of 3 to 4 weeks, we were able to increase our newsletter consumption by over 30%. So having given you all these examples, the question you really need to ask yourself, whether you're in a startup or in a large organization, is where are you on your product journey? And are you performing to the core DNA of being a product person? So before we end, let me just recap some of my learnings and some of these principles that I shared throughout this deck. First is, know where you are and where you want to get to. Get that acceptance. Whether if you're a product manager, you are or a designer, you are considered to be the leader of your Scrum team, the leader of your product team. And so if you can start at the product team level, and if you feel you don't have the power to influence the entire organization, start small, start in your product team level, and people will notice, and your leaders will notice, and it'll become a viral a viral process to adopt. Second, change the narrative, make everybody in your team and eventually in your organizations outcome focused, audience centric, and develop a problem solving mindset. Build the right products. There is no shortcut to it. And believe that your customers will love them if you follow the principles of focusing on who and why, being data driven or being data informed, and really going to market quickly, getting that feedback from your customers, learning whether your hypotheses worked or not, identifying the risky assumptions and testing them, and eventually course correcting. That is very important. If you don't iterate and just learn, then there's no action. Finally, in a large organization, particularly, you have to be a broken record, and you have to champion with empathy and humility. You may have to repeat the same message to your engineers, tune it in the language that engineers understand. To your product leadership team, tune it in the language that they understand. Use lean canvas, use business model canvas to tell your story. Be those storytellers, tailor your message, and be the voice of customers. Because if you don't tell your customer stories, then no one else will. And finally, build products, not because you can, but because they are needed in the market. There are problems that your users have and they are worth solving. Look outside in. And finally, it is not going to be easy. And I think that's the fun and challenge of being in a product and a design role. But then easy was never fun and rewarding. A little bit of discomfort is always good. And if you feel that you are a little uncomfortable, there are things in your team or in your organization that are not working, here is this beautiful community of UXDX where you will see that many of your friends are in similar state, and bounce off things that they are doing, and maybe there's a solution that you might find and you can go apply and iterate on it yourself. In the end, what I would say is that product management and design really becomes a life skill, and there is nothing more to that. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for your attention.